Good evening, friends. We have two important briefings lined up today beside my own regular interaction. The coming week will be a busy diplomatic one for India in terms of both Act East as well as India's global engagement through the G20 forum. Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi will be making an official visit to Vietnam on the 2nd and 3rd of September. He will arrive in the night of the 2nd, and the official program will begin on the morning of the 3rd. He will hold bilateral talks with his Vietnamese counterpart, Nguyen Xuan Phuc, apart from a number of other key engagements that Secretary East will brief you on today. From Vietnam, the Prime Minister will proceed directly to Hangzhou for the G20 summit, which will take place on the 4th and the 5th of September. Prime Minister will attend all the various sessions of the summit, as well as bilateral meetings with other leaders on the sidelines, including a BRICS leaders meeting. Secretary West will shortly brief you on this leg of the Prime Minister's tour. Prime Minister will return to India on the 5th of September. PM will again depart for Lao PDR on the 7th September to attend the 14th ASEAN-India Summit and the 11th East Asia Summit, which will take place over the 7th and 8th of September. Secretary East will brief you in detail regarding this final leg of his tour. So let me begin today's briefings with giving the floor to Secretary West, who will talk about Prime Minister's visit to China for the G20 summit. I give the floor to Secretary West.
Thank you, Vikas, and good afternoon, friends. Just to tell you about what we hope to achieve from the G20 summit and what our participation there comprises. The summit is being held in Hangzhou on the 4th and 5th of September. It will comprise 5 thematic sessions, which I shall come to in a bit. The Indian delegation, as GSXP has just mentioned, is led by the Prime Minister. The delegation also includes Dr. Arvind Panagaria, the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, who is India's G20 Sherpa. The G20 is one of those international groupings where the heads are supported by the Sherpas, and so at the center of India's G20 activity is the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog. Foreign Secretary and Shaktikant Das, Secretary DA, will also be part of the delegation. Each G20 summit, and this is the 11th of them, is devoted to a particular theme. I'd like to give you some background about the G20. The G20 used to be a forum where finance ministers of major economies used to come together for discussions on the margins of the annual fund bank meetings. At the time of the financial crisis in 2008, as proposed by the United States, the G20 was elevated to a summit-level gathering to discuss cooperation and coordination in economic and financial matters. As I said, this happened at the time of the global economic crisis, global financial crisis, and the idea was that this would be the premier body to address global economic issues. At that time, it was a question of bringing the world economy out of the downward spiral that it was in. Now it is a more positive agenda, including reforming the international financial sector, strengthening global governance, particularly global economic governance, and the minimizing of risks to the global economy. Each G20 summit has a general theme around which discussions are organized. The theme for the Hangzhou summit is going to be towards an innovative, invigorated, interconnected, and inclusive world economy. So 4 I's. As I said, there are going to be 5 themes for the discussions at the summit. Our Prime Minister will be the lead speaker. for a session which is entitled Inclusive and Interconnected Development. Now, this, as you see, is a theme which actually correlates very closely with the manner in which we approach economic development. So he will be the lead speaker in that. But of course, all the leaders speak on all the themes at this forum. This is a very important forum. It's a leaders-only forum. So this offers a lot of opportunities to also hold discussions on matters beyond these themes. Being leaders, they review the entire global agenda. The G20, in addition to the summit, also includes a virtually year-long program of activities. It includes several meetings of finance ministers and central bank governors. In the Chinese presidency, there have been 3 such meetings this year in Shanghai, in Washington, D.C., and in Chengdu. In addition, the G20 Sherpas have been in almost constant discussion, and their deliberations have included subjects such as innovation, the digital economy, the new industrial revolution, trade and investment, energy, employment, agriculture and food security, the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals, global health, and the financing of terrorism, as well as the refugee crisis. G20 working groups have been established and have met on infrastructure investment, on international financial architecture, on climate finance, on employment, and so forth. G20 ministers who are concerned with employment, with trade, with energy and agriculture have already met. And G20 science and technology ministers are scheduled to meet in November this year. The reason I'm giving you all these details is basically to give you a sense of the very broad ambit that the G20 covers, virtually every aspect of economic governance and economic development, and also to give you a sense of the amount of activity that this entails in terms of the major economies of the world staying in almost constant contact on matters of common interest. From our perspective, our priorities at this G20 summit are going to be the cross-border mobility of professionals, particularly in services, the reduction in remittance costs from overseas Indians, poverty eradication, moderation in consumption, and more sustainable lifestyles, and improved technology access, particularly for renewables and post-harvest agriculture activities. These are, as you can see, fairly obvious issues of interest to India given the stage of our economic development and our particular situation. And we will continue to pursue these. As part of our G20 effort, we have also been supporting measures directed against terrorism, in particular terrorist finance and corruption. We have also supported measures aimed at reforming the global tax administration in the context of tax evasion and tax avoidance, but also in terms of improving global taxation governance in general. Matters related to climate finance are also being pursued through the G20. There is a G20 working group on climate finance and green finance. On green finance, we have stressed the point that the definition of green finance is still to be agreed. It is still to be the subject of a consensus. And therefore, our approach on this is that we look at it from the perspective of climate-friendly finance. There has been an initiative taken on the G20 this year pertaining to antimicrobial resistance in terms of new antibiotics. We have participated in this, and our particular points are, we have advocated the concepts of affordability and market access for antibiotics as major criteria of interest to us, so as to incentivize R&D, but also ensure that antibiotics are actually affordable and accessible for those who need them. So I had wanted to give you a quick rundown on the G20 summit, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there should be any. Thank you.
The floor is now open for questions on the G20 summit. Venkat?
I think the hosting of the G20 summit is a rotational thing. When does India get to host, number one? Number two, could you tell us something about the bilateral meetings the Prime Minister will have with the BRICS leaders as well as Mr. Obama and others? Thanks.
Thank you. The membership of the G20 is divided into what they call baskets. And the rotation, as you pointed out, goes between the baskets. The particular basket to which India belongs will be up for hosting the summit in 2019. Typically, summits of the G20 are decided 2 years in advance. So at this point, we know where the summits will be in 2017 and 18. The issue of the hosting of the summit in 2019 will be determined at some point in 2017. So that is where we are in terms of hosting the summit. In terms of bilaterals, as far as I know, there will be the customary meeting with the host of the summit. So there will be a meeting, I believe, with the President of China, who's the host. I think other bilaterals are still in the process of being worked out, because the way the schedule is, it's actually a very, very tight schedule. And access to meeting sites is very strictly limited. So typically, the experience is that bilateral summits tend to be on the margins or in the meeting room themselves. They have what they call pull-asides. So I guess that is the sort of arrangement that will happen. The BRICS summit is again something which is done. It's like a small meeting of BRICS leaders, which is typically held on the margins of G20 summits. This time it is going to be, I believe, on the morning of the 4th, soon after the delegations arrive. That is really the way it will.
Ashok?
Sujata, I want to know the progress on CRS on automatic exchange of information and the BEPS project. Number two is, will there be a talk on terror financing and terrorism?
Yeah, I believe the BEPS project will certainly be discussed. The automatic exchange on tax information is a forum where we pursue our interests. We do this across the board in all the venues where these are discussed, including the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and the World Trade Organization. So this is a concern, and we always express our views on this, as we will in the G20. You see, the G20, it is not as though IPR would be an agenda item in the G20. The way the conversation goes, these subjects are touched on in the course of the discussions. And as I said, we express our views on these subjects in the G20 and in other fora where these are the subject of discussion.
Any other questions on G20? Yeah, Ranjit?
Besides economic issues like South China Sea will also be taken up during the summit?
To invite Secretary East, Srimati Preeti Saran, to give you a briefing on Prime Minister's bilateral visit to Vietnam, and then a bit later on the visit to Lao PDR for the ASEAN-India Summit and the East Asia Summit. Secretary East is on her way. think she already answered that. To wait for the transcript. Basically, the one bilateral which we are confirming right now is the bilateral with the President of China, because that's customary. He is the host of the G20 summit, and it's always customary for the host to meet all the top leaders who are coming. So I think Prime Minister's meeting with President Xi is very soon after arrival, in fact. But as for the other meetings, they are really time dependent. They depend on whether both leaders are able to finish their interventions before a particular time. So typically we do not give out advance information on, who's meeting who. If the meeting does not happen, then people read other meanings that, oh, the meeting was supposed to be held and did not happen, and things like that. Okay. I welcome Secretary East and her strong delegation, including JS South and JS ASEAN ML. Tomorrow, as you know, Prime Minister is meeting President Al-Sisi of Egypt, and immediately thereafter we'll leave for the airport to depart for Vietnam, where we will arrive late tomorrow night, and then the third will be the main bilateral day for meetings in Vietnam, which is a very important partner. So to brief you first on the important bilateral visit to Vietnam, I give the floor to Secretary East.
Thank you, Vikas, and thank you all for joining us here this afternoon for this briefing. So I'll begin with Prime Minister's visit to Vietnam. That's taking place, as Vikas mentioned, from 2nd to 3rd of September. And then I'll also like to brief you about Honorable Prime Minister's visit to Laos, to Vientiane, where he will be attending the India-ASEAN Summit. And he'll be going there from 7th to 8th of September. He'll attend the the 14th India-ASEAN Summit, followed by the 11th East Asia Summit. So I'll start with Vietnam. You know that Vietnam is an important strategic partner for India. And when Prime Minister goes, he will meet the leadership, the topmost leadership of the country, which includes Mr. Nguyen Phu Trong, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, President Chan Dai Quang, Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc, and the Chairman of the National Assembly, Madame Nguyen Thi Kim Nien. These are new leaders. Vietnam had their elections to the Communist Party, Congress, which was held in January, and so this provides an opportunity for the Honorable Prime Minister to meet with the new leadership following the Party Congress and the National Assembly elections, which were held in March this year. This would be the first bilateral visit at the level of our Prime Minister to Vietnam in the last 15 years. The last such bilateral visit took place when Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee went in 2001. Dr. Manmohan Singh had, of course, visited Vietnam, Hanoi, for the India-ASEAN Summit in 2010. The visit takes place at an important time when next year we would be celebrating the 45th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations with Vietnam and the 10th anniversary of our strategic partner with Vietnam. Vietnam also happens to be the country coordinator for India in the ASEAN for this year and for the next 2 years, and therefore that also has an importance. Our relations with Vietnam are characterized by warmth and a high degree of trust. To use a quotation from a former Prime Minister of Vietnam, India-Vietnam relations are like a clear blue sky without any clouds. Vietnam is the central pillar of India's Act East policy, and our priorities for cooperation range in a whole host of areas, including defense and security, trade and investment, in maritime cooperation, in energy resources, in integrating ourselves to the ASEAN community, and for leveraging our interactions in regional and international forums. We work very closely with Vietnam, in ASEAN of course, but also in the Mekong-Ganga cooperation, in the ASEAN Regional Forum, in the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, in East Asia Summit, and at the United Nations. At the UN, Vietnam has been supportive of India's membership to an expanded United Nations Security Council. In the non-permanent candidature, we have offered reciprocal support to Vietnam for the year 2020-21 for Vietnam and for India in 21-22. Defense and security cooperation with Vietnam is very robust, and it includes areas including counterterrorism, transnational crimes. And in defense cooperation, our focus has been on capacity building and training in high-level exchanges, and more recently in defense procurement. Our bilateral trade with Vietnam has been growing at almost 26% per annum in the last few years, and today it stands at $7.8 billion. We have a surplus with trade with Vietnam to the tune of $2.8 billion. We have our leaders last time that they had met had agreed to set up a trade target of $15 billion by 2020. And the areas that we focus on in our trade relationship is in textiles, in machinery, in pharmaceuticals, in IT and other services sectors. India is also an important investor in Vietnam. Presently, we have invested in oil and gas exploration, in agro-processing, sugar, IT, etc. And it stands at about $1 billion plus. But there is, if those of you who followed India-Vietnam relations would be aware that the Tata Power is in the process of implementing a 1,320 megawatts thermal power plant in South Vietnam, in Soc Trang province. And that is about $1.8 billion investments. And we feel that once that project is successfully implemented, certainly it will encourage more Indian investments. And certainly it will also bring India as one of the top 10 investors into Vietnam. Apart from trade and investment, India has traditionally provided support to Vietnam in several areas, including in extending lines of credit for infrastructure and in the agriculture sector. We've also helped set up institutions. For example, there is an advanced resource center in ICT in Hanoi that was established with Indian assistance. There is another one which is an entrepreneur development center, also in Hanoi. There is under the ASEAN framework, English language speaking center. There is a high-performing computing facility and a cyber forensic lab. Multilaterally, apart from ASEAN, we've also assisted Vietnam in the IBSA context, the India, Brazil, South Africa, and we're doing 2 projects. One was already completed. This is on rice seed research in Da Nang in central Vietnam. And there's another one that is ongoing on telemedicine in Hai Phong in North Vietnam. In addition to our cooperation and development assistance program that I've just outlined, connectivity and people-to-people contacts are very important elements of our cooperation with Vietnam. We provide about 150 iTech scholarships and another 50 scholarships from ICCR to Vietnam. Perhaps it's one of the largest scholarship programs that we provide to a country beyond our immediate neighborhood. In addition to that, there are historical civilizational ties, and the Champa civilization has its influence very visible there, and these are obvious in the Cham monuments, again in central Vietnam, in Quang Nam province. And so the Archaeological Survey of India has seen these temples, and we've offered our assistance in restoration of this temple complex, some of which was destroyed during the American War period as well. We have plans to open up a culture center for which modalities are being worked out. We have, in anticipation of that culture center, already sent a yoga teacher. And yoga happens to be a very important element that binds us culturally together. And the 2 consecutive international days of yoga that were celebrated last year and this year have created a much wider awareness and enthusiasm for yoga. The other civilizational historical linkage that we have with Vietnam is in this area of Buddhism, and there is a resurgence, a renewed interest there, and certainly we have been training a lot of Buddhist monks and scholars. Indian television programs, in particular Balika Badhu, is very, very popular there. Some others are also very popular in Vietnam. Indian cinema is very popular, and I think those are again elements that help in cementing closer people-to-people contacts. We are in the process of discussing all these areas. I gave you this broad brush just to give you an idea of how broad and robust our collaboration and cooperation with Vietnam is. And we hope that when our Prime Minister visits Vietnam and he meets the leadership, as a result of the discussions, some important agreements would be signed, but that's still work in progress, and we'll keep you informed as the visit progresses. Am I taking too long? No, it's fine. Okay. So can I move on to India-ASEAN, the India-ASEAN summit, which will be held on 8th of September in the morning, soon thereafter followed by the East Asia Summit. Around the same time, the ASEAN member countries, and there are 10 of them, as you know, they hold one after the other summit meetings with their dialogue partners, and India is one of the privileged partners with whom we have with a summit level relationship. So this would be the 14th India-ASEAN Summit that will be held in Vientiane, the capital of Laos, PDR, and it will be followed by the 11th East Asia Summit. This is the third time that our Prime Minister, Honorable Shri Narendra Modi, is actually participating in the India-ASEAN and the East Asia Summit. You would remember that last year the same thing was held in Kuala Lumpur, and before that it was in Myanmar, in Naypyidaw. ASEAN is central to India's Act East policy, and it was enunciated by our Prime Minister in Myanmar in 2014. Both the summits, therefore, the East Asia Summit as well as the India-ASEAN Summit, provides a very important platform to reiterate the importance of our partnership with ASEAN and with the wider Asia-Pacific region. ASEAN is diverse, but is a very successful regional grouping. It is 7th largest economy. It has the 3rd largest market. Its GDP is about $2.5 trillion, and its average growth rate is 4.6% per annum. Of course, there are individual countries within ASEAN that are growing even faster, and Vietnam is one of them. Vietnam, I think the growth rate is about 6.7%. India became a sectoral partner, dialogue partner of ASEAN in 1992, and a full dialogue partner in 1996. And then we had summit level contacts with them from 2002. And in 2012, we entered into what is called a strategic partnership with ASEAN, just to give you an idea of how the relationship has evolved and the importance, the growing importance of our engagement with ASEAN. We have about 30 dialogue mechanisms across different sectors in ASEAN, presided over by an annual summit where our Prime Minister would be attending. In addition to that, we have 7 ministerial level interactions, which range from the foreign ministers, and of course we just had in the month of July, a foreign ministers meeting. In August, we had our MOS for Commerce and Industry attend the economic ministers meeting. In addition to that, there is ministerial level participation in agriculture, in tourism, in telecommunications, in environment, and new and renewable energy. At the upcoming summit, the ASEAN-India Summit, the 10 countries and our Prime Minister will review the progress of growth in our relationship across the 3 pillars of our interaction with ASEAN, and these are the political security, economic, and socio-cultural cooperation. We have drawn up plans of action, 5-year plans of action, and currently we are in the process of implementing the 3rd plan of action, which runs from 2016 to 2020. India is scaling up its cooperation with ASEAN in the political security sphere, primarily focused on traditional and non-traditional security challenges facing the region. We look forward to working closely with ASEAN on counterterrorism, on anti-piracy, on cybersecurity, and maritime issues. This is the first India-ASEAN summit that will take place after the ASEAN Economic Community came into existence in December last year. And next year, we would be celebrating the 25th anniversary of our partnership with ASEAN. So this particular summit provides an important opportunity for the leaders, for our Prime Minister and the leaders of ASEAN to discuss and review how far we have gone and what is it that we could do to enhance our relationship with the ASEAN region. Our bilateral trade with ASEAN, I shared figures of our bilateral trade with Vietnam, but with all the 10 countries put together, the bilateral trade is $0.04 billion, and it comprises about 10.12% of our total trade, our global trade. There is a great scope for further increase in trade volumes, and we have a mechanism for reviewing our trade in goods. Last year, you would perhaps know that we had also activated our ASEAN-India trade in services and investment. So we are really moving into the ASEAN-India free trade area, which has provided the instruments and the opportunity for our businesses to work closer together. It has also provided an opportunity for the businesses on both sides to be part of the value chain and production networks. Separately, when I talk about the East Asia Summit, though it's not exactly part of that, you would be following on trade negotiations. We are also negotiating with 10 ASEAN countries and 6 other, well, India plus 5 other countries, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And that again provides another opportunity for providing these enabling instruments for improving our trade, our investment, and enhancing our economic cooperation. Our investments from ASEAN for the period 2007 to 2015 have totaled approximately $32.4 billion, which accounts for nearly 13% of the total FDI equity flows into India. And Indian investments into ASEAN during the same period was about $38.6 billion. We support ASEAN centrality in all our interactions in the region, in the Asia-Pacific region, whether it is in the East Asia Summit, whether it is in the ADMM+, that's the ASEAN Defense Ministers Meeting Plus, or the ASEAN Regional Forum, which is a grouping of about 27 countries, and the expanded ASEAN Maritime Forum. The initiative for ASEAN integration, we want to partner as part of this particular initiative to help in capacity building in the ICT and English language courses, in space, and in renewable energy. The focus of all our development assistance so far has been on the CLMV countries of ASEAN, which is Cambodia, Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. We have to help in our development programs and projects constituted 3 separate funds. There is one called the India-ASEAN Cooperation Fund, and that has a corpus of about $50 million. There is another fund called the ASEAN-India Green Fund of $5 million, and an ASEAN-India Science and Technology Fund for another $5 million. These provide us the opportunity to identify projects where we can collaborate. In addition to that, last year, you would remember when Prime Minister was in Kuala Lumpur, he had announced a $1 billion line of credit for physical and digital connectivity to ASEAN countries. We have given concrete proposals, which include areas such as fiber optic projects or broadband networks, on telemedicine and teleeducation. In addition to that, of course, we are already bilaterally, trilaterally, and otherwise working on 2 very important connectivity projects. One is the trilateral highway, which runs from India through Myanmar to Thailand, and then, of course, the Kaladan multimodal project. We regard our partnership with ASEAN as an important element to develop the northeastern states of India as well, and we think that the northeast states of India is an important gateway to ASEAN. It has, after all, a border land connectivity with Myanmar. In any case, ASEAN is our extended neighbor, and we have maritime neighborhood with Thailand and Indonesia as well in ASEAN. People-to-people contacts, just as it's important in Vietnam, is equally important for other ASEAN countries, with all of whom we have very close historical links. Same reasons: Buddhism, civilizational ties through Buddhism and Hinduism, and other aspects as well. We are all plural, tolerant societies, and that binds us together. We've offered ITech and scholarship programs to other ASEAN countries. We have instituted what is called a Delhi Dialogue, which is a 1.5 forum, and there is another ASEAN network of think tanks. We have also established an ASEAN-India center, and then just recently on 8th of August in Shillong, we inaugurated the ASEAN-India Study Center at the NEHU, at the Northeast Hill University. I'm giving you these examples of how, at the academic level, at the think tanks level, we want to continue this collaboration. An important focus of our Prime Minister's meeting with the 10 ASEAN leaders would be, of course, to review what has taken place so far, how is it that we can work better, and how is it that we could, mark the 25th anniversary of our partnership with what are the activities to further enhance this collaboration. I'll then move on to the next summit, which is the East Asia Summit, which will take place also on 8th of September, soon after the India-ASEAN Summit is over. The East Asia Summit comprises of 10 ASEAN countries and another 8 countries, which includes, of course, India, China, USA, Russia, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and Republic of Korea. This is a leaders-led forum in the Asia-Pacific region, and it comprises of 55% of the world's population and 55% of the global GDP as well. So you can see how important it is as a grouping and how important it is for our leaders to meet annually. India is a founding member of the East Asia Summit. This was established in 2005, and consistently since 2005, the Prime Minister of India has attended the East Asia Summit. This would be the 11th East Asia Summit that the Indian Prime Minister would attend. Prior to the East Asia Summit, we've just had in the month of July a foreign ministers meeting of the East Asia partner countries and a trade ministers meeting in August. The important initiatives that India has announced and taken in the East Asia Forum the foremost is Nalanda University. We've also established a virtual knowledge portal on disaster management. I think that's an important area for collaboration. And web portal on trauma care. The annual East Asia Summit provides an opportunity for leaders to exchange views and assess regional and international issues of concern, including traditional and non-traditional security threats, primarily, of course, terrorism, which is the biggest scourge that plagues us all. And India has been a major victim there, so maritime security, non-proliferation, etc. The East Asia Summit also reviews 6 priority areas. These are education, energy and environment, finance, pandemics, disaster management and mitigation, and connectivity. Of course, again, it is still work in progress. We expect the chair, and this is Laos this year, to issue a chair statement at the end of the discussions after the leaders have met. And there might be separate individual statements, but that is still in the process of evolving. So I'll stop here and would be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Secretaries, for that very comprehensive briefing on both the bilateral visit to Vietnam as well as the 2 important summits in Vientiane. I also have with me Pooja Kapoor, who is Joint Secretary ASEAN Multilateral, and Jaideep Mazumdar, who is Joint Secretary South. So the floor is now open for questions. Okay.
Ma'am, can you just update us on the status of the oil exploration projects with Vietnam, and also is the sale of BrahMos missiles also on the cards?
As far as oil exploration is concerned, we have been in Vietnam from the 80s. And currently India has the OVL, the ONGC Videsh Limited, has invested in block 6.1, which is a productive block. There are negotiations going on for another block, which is 128. And so we expect negotiations on that to continue positively. In addition to that, Government of Vietnam, Petro Vietnam, have offered additional blocks, but negotiations are going on. So I would not be in a position today, but maybe towards the end of the visit, we should be able to share if there's anything else concrete, but that is one area. In addition to just oil exploration, we have had discussions in the last 2 years on our interest in participating in midstream and downstream projects as well. We've had delegations from the Indian Oil Corporation and other Indian companies visiting Vietnam, holding discussions. There is a condensate project that we have been discussing, and we hope that this is work in progress. So that is as far as the energy sector is concerned. On your other question, as I mentioned in my initial remarks, that we have a very robust defense cooperation focused on capacity building, training, which is more recently. You would remember that when our Rashtrapati ji had visited in 2014, a line of credit, $100 million line of credit for patrol boats was announced. And we expect there's an interest and growing interest in defense procurement from India. And we are prepared to look at all aspects of this relationship and are in discussions with Vietnam.
Akhilesh.
Madam, Prime Minister is going at a time when lots of issues like South China Sea is one of the most important for the whole region. And all the countries of ASEAN, China, as well as the East Asia are involved in the issue. So do you think that Prime Minister is going to take some stand on this issue that is perturbing the whole region?
You know, our stand on South China Sea is very well known. You know that we are committed to, and we have always advocated, freedom of navigation, of overflights, and of unimpeded commerce. And we feel that all disputes should be resolved peacefully in keeping with international obligations, and threat or use of force is avoidable. So you've seen our stand. There has been this, there are overlapping claims, there are disputes. We've also commented, I think our official spokesman had commented on 12th of July about response to the arbitral tribunal, which is, so we noted the decision, and we hope that, India is parties to UNCLOS, and we hope that there will be full respect for UNCLOS. As far as Vietnam is concerned, we, they have appreciated our own position and how we have resolved our own maritime boundary with Bangladesh, and so our position is well known, and we would be reiterating that.
Once you are going there, will Prime Minister again raise this?
It is bound to be discussed in East Asia Summit, because that is a forum where we discuss regional and international issues. And of course, we will be discussing it with all the leaders present there.
Yeah, Ashok.
Madam, what is the progress on special purpose vehicle for CLMV countries, which was announced in the previous budget?
Yes. It was announced in the previous budget, and it is being coordinated by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And I have been informed that they are in the process of drawing up the modalities of that. It's called a Project Development Fund. I think they're still not clear whether to call it a special purpose vehicle, but it's a Project Development Fund intended for the CLMV countries, which will encourage and certainly assist Indian companies to invest in these four countries. My colleague tells me that apparently it is under discussion, and they will be, we'll hear from the Ministry of Commerce and Industry soon on this one, but it is, we're drawing up the modalities, so.
Yeah, Venkat.
The connectivity we're talking about with ASEAN, is it something on the lines of what we're doing in Africa, with hospitals and internet connectivity and all that? Number one. Number two, Vietnam. There was a proposal that was being discussed to provide direct connectivity between India and Vietnam. When are the flights going to start? And they wanted us to train their pilots to fly Sukhoi flights. Has there been any progress on that? Thanks.
So you've asked three questions. The first one is on connectivity. As far as connectivity is concerned, yes, when we look at connectivity, connecting to the entire ASEAN region, we look at, of course, physical connectivity through land, through sea, and through air. And there is work in progress in each of these. We are also looking at digital connectivity. We look at people-to-people contacts. We look at cultural connectivity. And so, everything that I have outlined as part of our collaboration, whether it's bilaterally with Vietnam or in the multilateral forum of ASEAN, I think we are focused in each of our programs somehow enhances our physical connectivity, our cultural, our economic, our people-to-people contact. So it's work in progress, and it's done well for itself. On your second question about Vietnam and direct flights, we have an air services agreement with them. In 2014, Jet Airways had initiated flights, but they were not direct, they were via Bangkok. We are constantly encouraging airlines, both in India and in Vietnam, to look at the opportunities. And there are growing opportunities, especially with tourism. You would remember that last year we had announced an e-visa, electronic visa, for all the 10 ASEAN countries. And the Buddhist circuit is a very important circuit for tourists from the ASEAN countries. Indians, again, are great travelers, and they travel to several ASEAN countries. Vietnam per se, I think we really need to, we can provide the instruments which are in position. The air services agreement is there. We hope that the airlines, both from the Indian side as well as the Vietnamese side, will look at the market and get it going. Yes, so on that one, yes, there is an ongoing discussions. We have been in discussions with Vietnam. We have a very strong composite package for training of the Navy, and we are now discussing areas of collaboration amongst them.
Ranjit.
My question is a follow-up to the previous question on BrahMos missile. You know, Vietnam has publicly asked India, requested India to supply this missile to their forces. Is India giving consideration to this?
I think I clarified that we have a very robust conversation going on with the government of Vietnam, and we are prepared to look at all areas of cooperation where when it's raised. So,
Aditya.
It's a repetitive question, but still, I would ask on Secretary Kerry's remarks on the South China Sea. He almost welcomed it, and he said that China should learn from India's respect for the International Tribunal. So I just want to ask you, the growing strategic and defense cooperation between India and Vietnam, could this be linked to checking China's assertiveness in the region? And in the coming days, will India and Vietnam play a greater role in the Southeast Asia? How important will be India's role to bring these countries together?
I have to tell you that India-Vietnam relations, and you mentioned the strategic partnership, is a very, very strong relationship, and it goes back centuries. So without giving you a history lesson, and I did mention about the charm monuments, etc. So it goes back centuries. In the current, in more modern times, let's say in the last century and the current century. After Vietnam won the war, the Dien Bien Phu victory in 1954, the French defeated, the Indian Prime Minister was the first international leader to visit Vietnam. When both our countries were fighting for independence, our leaders were in touch with each other and supported each other through our independence movement. During the war years, when Vietnam was fighting the American war and otherwise, we have constantly provided support. At a time when there were international sanctions on Vietnam, India supported Vietnam. So, our relationship goes back centuries, and in modern times, it's very strong. And again, to quote that, it stands on its own. It is an issues-free relationship. It stands on its own merits. In modern times, apart from the support that we provided through their period of struggle, in modern times, it is a robust economy. It is, it is a story which is exemplary. From a war-torn country to have clocked almost 10% growth per annum for 2 decades consistently, and to be able to pull itself out from abject poverty to a middle-income country is an inspiration for us, and we feel it's an important partner for us in economic cooperation. So when we call them our strategic partner, we go back to the support that we have provided each other traditionally, and we build upon it in all areas, whether it's defense, whether it's security, whether it's economic, political, cultural. So please view the India-Vietnam relationship on its own merits. It stands on its own.
Yeah, at the back.
Ma'am, as you have mentioned about the connectivity of the Northeast, Kaladan project is very important. So now every year we see that the deadline of this project is being deferred. There is some indigenous people who are creating problems for resistance about the widening of the river and the roads. So what is the status now, and how soon this project will be completed?
As I'm aware, it is on track. Certainly there have been issues, but we are solving these bilaterally with Myanmar, because that is the other country through which the Kaladan project is to be implemented. And I'm confident that we will be able to keep to the timelines that we have looked at.
Anash.
Ma'am, OVL has been in fact engaged in oil exploration projects in Vietnam for last few years. So in the wake of the verdict by International Court of Arbitration, so is India looking at ramping up its oil exploration projects in South China Sea?
OVL has been participating in oil and gas exploration in Vietnam, not in the last few years, but since the 1980s. So it's been there for quite some time. And when OVL participates in oil and gas exploration and other Indian companies participate in other midstream and downstream projects, they do it with a view to securing our energy requirements as part of our energy security issues.
मधुरेंद्र,
मैम आपने कहा कि वियतनाम में जो टेम्पल्स हैं और ओल्ड जो आर्किटेक्ट हैं उसको रिस्टोर करने का इंडिया का प्लान है, उसके बारे में इलैबोरेट कर सकेंगे?
जी, वहाँ पर वो चार्म मॉन्यूमेंट्स हैं, वैसे और भी कई मॉन्यूमेंट्स सारे वियतनाम में, ख़ासतौर पे दक्षिण वियतनाम में हैं. वो चंपा सिविलाइजेशन जो था उसकी उसी से सिमिलर हैं. और पिछले साल नहीं 2014 में जब वियतनाम के प्रधानमंत्री यहाँ आए थे तो हमने एक MOU साइन किया था. उसके तहत हमने आर्कियोलॉजिकल सर्वे ऑफ इंडिया ने डिसाइड किया था कि हम उसमें ये जो मीसोम जो जगह है दानांग के पास सेंट्रल वियतनाम में, उसका एक टेम्पल कॉम्प्लेक्स हम लोग उसको रिस्टोर करेंगे, क्योंकि वो जो मंदिर है वहाँ पर वो उसी तरह के हैं जैसे कि हमारे उसी विंटेज के टेम्पल्स जो हमारे देश में भी हैं. सो वी आर वर्किंग आउट द मोडालिटीज ऑफ हाउ टू वर्क ऑन इट. Yeah, just as a matter of interest for you, the Misom temples, which are there in Quang Nam province, near Da Nang, which is a very popular beach resort, of course also popular, known during the American War days. Quang Nam province is also the province from where the present Prime Minister, Mr. Nguyen Xuan Phuc, comes from. So there is he has an emotional commitment to it as well.
Okay, last question, Kalol.
Ma'am, you have spoken a lot about Vietnam and very little about Laos. The fact is there is no consensus over South China Sea between Laos and Vietnam, since they both are leading two different blocs. Vietnam and Philippines have been very eager for a statement from ASEAN, whereas the ASEAN Ministerial last month did not issue a statement on the PCS verdict. How are you going to create a consensus between these two blocs, since you are visiting two countries?
You know, when we deal with ASEAN as one entity, a grouping of 10 member states. It is for the ASEAN member states to resolve their own internal differences. What we have done constantly at every stage has been to support the centrality of ASEAN in its role in the Asia-Pacific region. We stand for and constantly support ASEAN's unity and ASEAN's centrality, and we'll continue to do that.
I think this concludes the briefing on the Prime Minister's visit to Vietnam and the East Asia Summit and the India-ASEAN Summit. Thank you all. Now I'll resume the regular press briefing.
Thank you very much.
So I thank Secretary East, JS South, and JS ASEAN Multilateral. Good evening, friends. I have just one announcement before we dive into the Q&A session. Following the first round of the trilateral meeting between Afghanistan, India, and Iran that was held in New Delhi last April, the second round of the DG level meeting of the three countries was held in Tehran yesterday, that is 31st August 2016, which was hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran. In the meeting, a wide range of issues of common interest were discussed by the three parties, including the recent developments in the region and the trilateral political, economic, transit, and cultural cooperation. Discussing the situation in the region and Afghanistan, the three parties emphasized the need for regional cooperation to counter current and emerging threats of terrorism and extremism. In regard to the recent trilateral agreement signed by the three countries in May 2016 in Tehran, on development of transit routes to Afghanistan and the region through the port of Chabahar, it was agreed that in preparation for use of Chabahar to this end, some specialized meetings and seminars be organized for relevant experts and representatives from trade and industry, and the recommendations of these meetings be reviewed in the next meeting of the Directors General, which will be held in Kabul. The three parties also explored possible grounds for cooperation in the Heart of Asia Istanbul process. That concludes my only announcement. The floor is now open for questions. Let's start with Mukesh Kaushik.
Sir, Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif recently appointed his 22 parliamentarians as a special envoy to Kashmir to highlight the issue all over the world. Do you have any response? And what is the status of Foreign Secretary's proposed visit to Islamabad?
Well, sending out 22 envoys is not going to make their baseless and untenable claims legitimate. I would say that instead of sending 22 envoys with the wrong message to the wrong countries, it would have been better to send just one envoy with the right message to the right country. The message obviously has to be one of stopping support to cross-border terrorism, ending incitement to violence in Jammu and Kashmir, and putting an end to interference in India's internal affairs. Vijay, आप लोग सब हिंदी जानते हैं.
A week from now, I understand that the Prime Minister of Nepal is visiting India, and looking at Mr. Prachanda is going to come here, and I think 15th or 16th is coming. So what do you expect from the visit, looking at the previous, with the government, we had strained relations with them, you see?
Well, you may understand that he's coming, but I'm not in a position to confirm that officially. All I will say is that when Prime Minister had complimented Prime Minister Prachanda on assuming the office, he did invite him to visit India. The invitation was accepted by Prime Minister Prachand, and he will be visiting India shortly. But these visits have to be announced in conjunction with, both sides have to make simultaneous announcements. So I'm not in a position at this point in time to confirm that visit, apart from saying that yes, the visit will happen in the near future. With Nepal, as you know, we have very broad-based cooperation underpinned by centuries-old civilizational ties and people-to-people linkages. So I expect the entire gamut of issues relating to development cooperation. Prime Minister Prachanda, as you know, is very keen for reconstruction assistance in the wake of the earthquake to now actually start in earnest. We have promised them a lot of money, but nothing has been utilized so far. So I expect those issues will be taken up. The development projects that we have, Tarai roads and other projects, power trade agreement, I expect all those also to figure. And of course, we will get a briefing from him on what are his priorities and how he sees, his own role in expediting progress and development in Nepal. Aditya?
So my question is on Pakistan Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Nafeez Zakaria just mentioned in his press conference some time ago that Nawaz Sharif has yet again written a letter to United Nations Secretary General in which he says that Prime Minister Narendra Modi talking about Balochistan is completely unwarranted. He has also said that between the Indian side of Kashmir and Pakistan occupied Kashmir there can be no comparison at all, and also saying that India was setting some conditions for a dialogue process between India and Pakistan. So how do you react on this? And as I mentioned on CPEC, Pakistan Prime Minister has just visited Balochistan today. He was at the Gwadar port to launch 5 developmental projects. What is India's position on CPEC in the context of recent protests by people in Balochistan and Pakistan occupied Kashmir?
As far as the latest letter that has been written to the United Nations Secretary General, well, as I said, these are things we have seen before, and I have mentioned in a previous briefing that they can write as many letters as they want to. This will not change the reality on the ground. The reality on the ground is that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and part of the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir is under the forcible and illegal occupation of Pakistan. As far as the internal situation in Jammu and Kashmir is concerned, we believe Pakistan has no locus standi in commenting on that. We are very perfectly capable of dealing with that. Insofar as the China-Pakistan economic corridor is concerned, there also our position has been made very clear to both the parties concerned that it passes through Indian sovereign territory under Pakistan's illegal occupation. And when we say POK, it is exactly that. It is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. It is part of Indian territory, and we would obviously have concerns about any project happening there with any third-party collaboration. Okay, Arunim.
Sir, there are reports about Indians getting infected by the Zika virus in Singapore. Do you have anything on this?
India getting infected by
Indians,
Zika virus?
Indians.
Indians, okay. I can confirm that as of 12 noon on the 30th of August, 13 Indian nationals are being treated for the Zika virus in Singapore. This is information that has now officially been conveyed to us by the Singapore Ministry of Health. According to them, these patients are showing mild symptoms and have either recovered or are recovering. Their recovery process is being monitored closely. Due to patient confidentiality, the Singapore authorities are unable at this stage to share details of these patients without their consent with us. The cases seem to be localized in a defined area as per the Singapore Ministry of Health. Our mission is in constant and close touch with the Ministry of Health of Singapore and will continue to follow up to ensure that Indian nationals receive full medical support. Yeah, Akhilesh.
So Brazil new government has taken over and BRICS summit is going to happen in October. So do you think it will impact somehow or other the BRICS agenda and relationship with Brazil?
No, I already answered this question long ago that when the BRICS summit was announced, it was a collective decision of all 5 parties, and all 5 parties remain committed to honoring the date for the BRICS summit, which, as you know, is going to be held in Goa on the 15th and 16th of October. And we expect participation from the new president of Brazil.
There has been some issues in German Frankfurt airport. Do you have any idea?
That is your second question, which is not allowed. Now, the rules which were there in the previous round are gone. No. You can ask somebody else to ask that question. Ritu.
Afghanistan and Iran also have stakes in the Balochistan issue. So when the trilateral happened, so were these issues, the change in policy, the Balochistan policy of India was also discussed?
Look, the Afghanistan-Iran trilateral was not to discuss that particular issue. It was to discuss, cooperation among the 3 developments in the region, and as I mentioned, development of Chabahar port, which is going to benefit all 3 countries and the wider region as such. Yeah. Please take the mic.
Sir, is there any decision on India's participation in the upcoming NAM summit in Venezuela?
Not yet. The decision on the level of our participation is yet to be taken. Yeah, Madhurendra.
सर, अमेरिकी विदेश मंत्री जॉन कैरी अभी भी भारत में हैं, उनके शेड्यूल में कोई बदलाव हुआ है या फिर कोई उनके एंगेजमेंट्स बढ़े हैं, उसकी जानकारी मिल सकेगी?
देखिए, कल जैसे कि उनके स्टेट डिपार्टमेंट के प्रवक्ता ने स्पष्ट किया कि श्री कैरी जी को निर्देश दिया गया था कि वो यहाँ से सीधे हांगझाओ जाएं, जहाँ वो राष्ट्रपति ओबामा को ज्वाइन करेंगे। तो उसी की वजह से उन्होंने सोचा कि वापस अमेरिका जाएं और फिर इस इलाके में वापस आने से अच्छा है यहीं से वो डायरेक्ट चले जाएं। और जहाँ तक उनके यहाँ एंगेजमेंट्स का प्रश्न है, ये तो आपको यूएस अमेरिकी दूतावास से ही पूछना पड़ेगा। हमारे पास अभी कोई आधिकारिक तौर पर जानकारी नहीं है। स्मिता, I recognize you.
Thanks for recognizing me, Vikas. So, did the Americans in the talks between John Kerry and Sushma Swaraj at any point ask India to try and move forward for a dialogue with Pakistan? And did India raise the issues that it has in terms of the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir or Balochistan with America? Because since that's a concern that you've been raising, have you raised it with the Americans? And just a quick, why did the India-Afghanistan-US trilateral stop after 2013, which is to be resumed now?
Again, I think you have asked 2-3 questions. As far as the dialogue with the visiting US dignitaries, Secretary Kerry and Secretary Pritzker is concerned, you would have seen the very comprehensive joint statement that we put out. India-Pakistan relations were not discussed. Of course, Pakistan's support to terrorism was discussed, and as you know, it was referenced also in the joint statement. We have a very strong paragraph on Pakistan stopping support to cross-border terrorism, bringing to justice the perpetrators of the Mumbai terrorist attack of 2008 and the Pathankot terrorist attack of 2016. And there was also a reference that both countries will work closely on terrorist designations, and the US indicated its willingness to consider fresh listings of terror groups which indulge in cross-border terrorism. So I think the full spread of the bilateral relationship itself is sufficient to engage both sides in a very constructive way. You would have seen the very vast area that the joint statement covered and the discussions covered, from defense to space to agriculture to science and technology, trade and investment, people-to-people ties, visa issues. Everything was really discussed, but the issue that you are seeking information on was not raised. The trilateral started in 2012, another round was held in 2013, and then, maybe for scheduling reasons or other reasons, it could not meet for 2 years, and now it is going to meet again in 2016 on the margins of the UNGA. Ashish?
सर, जो सवाल आदित्य ने पूछा उसमें एक क्रूशियल पार्ट ये है कि नवाज शरीफ ने अपनी चिट्ठी जो बान की मून को दूसरी बार लिखी है उसमें कैटेगरिकली ये लिखा है कि प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी का बलूचिस्तान और पाकिस्तान ऑक्यूपाइड कश्मीर पर बयान टोटली अनवारंटेड है और यूएन चार्टर के खिलाफ है। इस पर आपकी क्या प्रतिक्रिया? उन्होंने प्रधानमंत्री के बयान पर आपत्ति दर्ज कराई।
यदि ह्यूमन राइट्स इश्यूज के ऊपर मानवाधिकार जिनको कुचला जा रहा है, जिनको रिप्रेस किया जा रहा है, दबाया जा रहा है, उसके बारे में बोलना गलत है, तो मेरे ख्याल से विश्व के कई देश और कई नेताओं को फिर कटघरे में खड़ा होना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि जैसा कि विदेश सचिव ने भी अभी हाल में ही एक बयान में कहा था कि ह्यूमैनिटी डज नॉट स्टॉप एट आवर बॉर्डर्स। If we feel strongly about human rights violations happening in a particular part of the world, then we have every right to raise those concerns. We will raise those concerns. We have raised those concerns in the past also. In fact, what is blatant interference is cross-border terrorism, which Pakistan has been indulging in again and again repeatedly. The capture of terrorist Bahadur Ali is a live example of what is actually interference in our country's internal affairs, where you are sending people armed to the hilt with the direct objective of creating mayhem and terror in another country. That is real interference, and that is what Pakistan needs to stop.
So there have been reports that our state-run media is planning to start Baloch bulletins. So is there a sort of synchronized campaign or has any decision been taken that India will officially raise the voice of the Baloch people at global fora?
As you know, the information and cultural space in South Asia has a lot of commonalities. And the All India Radio already provides its services in a number of foreign and Indian languages. To the best of my knowledge, they provide services in 27 foreign languages and 12 Indian languages, including in South Asia to an abiding audience for a number of years. And of course, fresh services can be added or existing services can be augmented depending on the demand. So I think we have to look at it purely from that perspective. Yeah.
This is a supplement on the CPEC issue. When we look at the UN resolution, the Kashmir resolution 57, it clearly mentions that those people who are normally not found in the region, that is in POK, must go back before India sort of recovers POK. And it refers to the Pathans and the outsiders who had come at that time. Do you think even the Chinese who are now present in POK, who are now part of the CPEC construction activities, they should also be evacuated from there?
That you are now going back to past history and UN resolutions and things like that.
Broader meaning.
I think we have all moved on from that. As you know, those UN resolutions are part of history, and you know why they were not implemented and which party is responsible for not implementing them. As far as we are concerned, in 1972, we entered into a new framework with Pakistan under the Simla Agreement, which was reiterated in the Lahore Declaration of 1999. And that is the framework under which we want to move ahead with Pakistan. No point, digging up old history. We have to move on with the new realities and, new perspectives.
सर, हम ब्रॉडली ये मानते रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान से जो आतंकवाद निर्यात होता है तो वो ज़ाहिर तौर पर पाकिस्तानी हुकूमत की कहीं ना कहीं उसमें एक संलिप्तता है। वो जानते हैं ये हो रहा है, फिर भी वो ध्यान नहीं देते। ऐसे में सवाल ये है कि जॉन कैरी साहब जब यहाँ थे तो उन्होंने एक आकलन किया और उन्होंने कहा कि पाकिस्तान एक विक्टिम है टेररिज्म का, और साथ ही साथ उन्होंने ये भी कहा कि नॉन स्टेट एक्टर्स है वहाँ, और पाकिस्तान की हुकूमत को मदद चाहिए, हमें पेशेंट होना पड़ेगा। इस आकलन से आप कितना सहमत?
नहीं, मैं तो जॉन केरी साहब के एक दूसरे बयान को आप फिर क्यों नज़रअंदाज कर रहे हैं, जहां उन्होंने कहा है कि पाकिस्तान सरकार को और अधिक करना है उन टेरर ग्रुप्स को रोकने के लिए जो अन्य देशों में आतंक फैला रहे हैं। तो ये कहना कि पाकिस्तान विक्टिम टेरर का नहीं टेरर का विक्टिम नहीं है, तो हम तो नहीं कह रहे ना, हम तो मान रहे हैं, लेकिन अगर वो विक्टिम है टेरर का, तो वो टेरर क्रिएट किसने किया? असली बात तो ये है ना, उस पर इंट्रोस्पेक्ट करना चाहिए कि ये विक्टिमाइजेशन जो है वो शुरुआत कैसे हुई। देखिए, हमें जहां तक असली मुद्दा ये है कि गुड टेररिस्ट और बैड टेररिस्ट के बीच में डिफरेंशिएशन नहीं होना चाहिए। असली मुद्दा यही है, और उस पर जॉन केरी साहब ने बहुत स्पष्ट शब्दों में कहा था कि अगर आप समझते हैं कि कुछ लोग गुड टेररिस्ट हैं, उनको आप पाल सकते हैं, और कुछ बैड टेररिस्ट हैं, उनको आप दबा सकते हैं, तो ये अंततः आपके ऊपर ही रिबाउंड करेगा। और जब तक ये डिस्टिंक्शन, ये फॉल्स डिस्टिंक्शन बनाया जाएगा कि अच्छे आतंकवादी और बुरे आतंकवादी के बीच में, तब तक इस चुनौती से हम मुकाबला नहीं कर पाएंगे। Please take the mic.
Sir, but was it disappointing that John Kerry was trying to do a balancing act in the region on one day with Sushma Swaraj, when our External Affairs Minister hit out at Pakistan, he agreed. On the other day, as Sanjeev was pointing out, he differentiated between non-state actors, state actors, and also said that Pakistan is a victim. Is it disappointing for India?
We do not look at diplomacy in those terms, and as I said, we do not draw those kinds of conclusions that you have drawn. As far as we are concerned, we go by the joint statement that India and the United States agreed at the end of the second strategic and commercial dialogue. Please look at joint statement, that joint statement. Please look at the language that is contained. That, as far as we are concerned, is the authoritative record of US position on the issue of cross-border terrorism. Okay, Maria.
Regarding the visit of Sushma Swaraj in Rome, there is something in agenda, some bilateral meeting with some representatives?
Yes, I can confirm that apart from her audience with His Holiness the Pope, we will also have a bilateral meeting between her and her Italian counterpart. Okay, that concludes the press briefing. Thank you all.